Hello, I am James Curtis, and this video will be an instruction video on how to lash your own A-frame. An A-frame is the structure I have already built behind me. It is a structure commonly used in the outdoors for a shelter. Usually, I will put a blanket over top of it, and that will protect me from the sun, wind, and rain. I have personally built over a dozen A-frames throughout the past 10 years through my experience as a Boy Scout. Two of these A-frames have been taller than 15 feet and have survived more than 2.5 years outdoors through the elements. Now, speaking of the elements, I do have to give you a quick disclaimer that using an A-frame outside in the sun, rain, and weather will cause it to deteriorate and become weaker. So make sure you always check your A-frame if you have it outside and make sure it's good and stable. Also, please note that if you do your lashings incorrectly, if you do your lashings too loose or too weak, your A-frame could topple down and cause serious injury. So make sure you always have good quality wood, rope, knots, and lashings before you attempt to build your own A-frame. Thank you and enjoy the video. For this video, you will need the following materials. You will need 3 6-foot long, 5/8 inch thick dowel rods, 4 4-foot, 5/8 inch thick dowel rods, and 2 2-foot long, 5/8 inch dowel rods with 12 lengths of 4-foot rope and 2 lengths of 15-foot rope, and a blanket of your choice. Now let's begin with the instruction part of the video. So for the first part, I would like to teach knots, since that is the integral structure of the lashing we will be building. And if you try to learn your knots during the lashing, your lashing will likely fall apart literally on top of you. So for this structure, we will use 3 different knots. We will have the clove hitch, the 2 half hitches, and the overhand on a bite. I will start with the clove hitch, and for this you will need one of your poles and one of your ropes. So to start with the clove hitch, you will need about 6 inches or more of extra rope. I recommend practicing to figure out how much rope you need for your poles, as you do not want to have extra rope dangling off at the end when you are done. So I will start with about 6 inches of rope, and I will take this rope and I will do 3 wraps in one continuous direction around the pole. So I'm going to start with my first wrap around the pole right now, and with this wrap I want to form an X. So I'm going to cross over top of my first wrap in the same continuing direction I had before. Now I will do my third and final wrap around the pole, and my aim is to go right in the middle of this X, and I will go underneath it. So to do this, you gotta make sure your rope comes up in the center of the X. If you take your rope and you go on the outside of the X, you will have to cross over your rope before you go under it. So make sure when you do your clove hitch for your third wrap, you come up on the correct side of the rope so you don't have to cross over it. Now you will take your rope and you will go underneath the center of the X. So I will prop that up with my fingers here so you can see the rope going underneath the center of the X there. Get a good view of that. And then when you tighten, you will grab both ends of the rope and pull perpendicular to your pole, and it will tighten. Now a proper clove hitch, when you evaluate it at the end, you will notice that it looks as though your rope is going in the middle of the 3 wraps, and it looks like it's coming out of the middle of the 3 wraps. And if you pull it, the pole will stay tied to the clove hitch. Let's go through that one more time, shall we? So again, I will have my pole and generally about 6 inches of rope and I will tie it in one continuous direction around the pole. First wrap here, I will make my X. It's okay to make your X nice and obvious. You can always pinch it together and tighten it afterwards. And now for my third one, make sure I come up on the correct side of the rope so I don't have to cross over it. And I will go underneath the center of the X there. So lift up my rope so you can see. I am taking this tying end and going underneath the center of the X. And then to tighten, you will pull both ends perpendicular to the rod. And again, it's correct. You can see the rope going in the center of the 3 fraps and coming out of the center of the 3 fraps. And that is the first knot, the clove hitch. I highly recommend practicing that knot to a point where you feel very comfortable tying it, even with shortened amount of rope. We will start and end every lashing for the structure with a clove hitch. So make sure you have that good in practice before we start. The other 2 knots I will teach will be used at the very end of the structure. So now I will cover the next knot, 2 half hitches. We will continue to use a pole, or could be a rope for later in the case, but we'll start with a pole and 1 rope. Now again, we are going to wrap around the pole, but in a different sense this time. So we're going to wrap around once, and that's all the wraps we're going to do for this. Now we're going to make a loop with the rope. I will call this shorter end of the rope the tying end for this purpose. We will take our tying end and make a loop by crossing over the excess long rope. And since we crossed over to make the loop, we will take our tying end and go through underneath the loop to form the first knot. And then pull that up against the pole. And that is the first half hitch. We have to do a second one to make 2 half hitches. So now I will cross my rope. Notice how it is pointing upwards and away. So I will make my loop above, since my rope is going above naturally. So I'll make that loop by going above the excess rope. And since the tying end is above the excess rope, we'll make the knot by going underneath the loop and pulling tight. Now that there's 2 half hitches, and the big difference between this and the clove hitch is it swivels a lot easier around the pole compared to a clove hitch. This is why we don't use it for the lashings. Now I will cover that one more time. Again, we're going to start with our pole, and generally about a good 6 inches of rope is good. You can have a little more for this one. This one's not as precise on the length. So we're going to start by making a wrap around our pole. And we're going to start by crossing our tying end here over the excess rope, form a nice loop. And then we're going to form the knot by going under the loop and through it and pulling it tight. Now again, since the rope wants to naturally go upwards in the direction, we're going to take that by going over the rope. And since we're taking our tying end over the excess rope, we're going to form the knot by going through the loop on the bottom side. And then we pull that rope tight. And that's our 2 half hitches. You have the 2 little loops there. Each one is a half hitch, forming our 2 half hitches. And now we have the last knot left, which is the overhand on a bite. We do not need our pole for this one, so I'll put that back. So for the overhand on a bite, I will first explain what a bite is. A bite in knots, not for chewing, just means a loop. So an overhand on a bite is just a overhand knot on a loop. So we're going to start by forming our loop. We can just let our rope dangle, pinch it right in the middle to form our loop. And the best way to tie it is I recommend pinching the rope together and sliding it down and treating this as one piece of rope for now. So now this is my new rope. It is 2 ropes thick, but I will treat it as 1 rope for the knot. So now for the overhand knot, I will take the rope and I will just form a loop by crossing the tying end over the excess rope. And so to form the knot, I will take this tying end here and I will go through the loop on the bottom side, trying to keep it as one piece of rope as possible, and then pulling the excess end. And what we have just accomplished is the overhand on a bite, which, if you pull it apart, is a loop in the middle of our rope. We will use this later at the very last step. So I'll cover that one more time. The overhand on a bite. We will begin by forming our bite or loop. So we'll just have your rope dangling, pinch it in the middle, form your loop, pinch it together so you have 1 new rope, which is 2 ropes thick. You will take it, form a loop, and I cross my loop over my excess end. So I will tie my knot by taking this loop here through the bottom, pulling it tight, and that is an overhand on a bite. Again, that just accomplishes a loop in the middle of our rope. So that are the 3 knots we will need for this structure. Make sure you practice these before you continue on with the rest of the video. So for step 2 of our A-frame structure, after step 1 of the knots, we will actually start lashing together the A part of our A-frame. For this, we will need 2 of our 4-foot poles and 1 of our 4-foot ropes. So I'll gather those real quick. Now for this, I really hope you practice that clove hitch by now, because that's how we're gonna start. We're gonna get down and start with 1 of our poles and the 1 rope. And we're gonna start with our clove hitch a couple inches, I'd say about 3 or 4 inches from the top. Tie our clove hitch with the X, make sure you go the correct side, and go underneath the X. Pull tight. Good tight clove hitch. Okay. Now we're going to grab our second pole here. At this point in time, figure out at what angle you want your A-frame to have. What I mean is this lashing will join together our 2 poles here at one point. If you want it up high, put your clove hitch up higher and it'll bend there. If you want a stout wide A, put your clove hitch down lower and you will have your poles connected there. I recommend anywhere from about 4 inches from the top down to about maybe 8 inches. So I will go a distance here. That looks about 5 inches from the top in my case. So I will start with the shear lashing now, which will pinch our 2 poles together. And this will start with a figure 8 pattern. So allow me to show you what this will look like. I will take my rope, I will go down the center, around the pole here, down through the center, around the pole here, down the center, around the pole. And if you can look at the rope down there, you can see that is making a figure 8. One problem with this is we have our poles very far apart, and that is not a good practice for lashings. So when you actually do this, make sure you keep your poles close and together. I recommend keeping a hand around them to make sure they don't move apart. Now I recommend using a thumb down here to hold it as I tie my figure 8. So if I need to move my right hand somewhere, my right hand is free to do whatever, and my lashing still stays tight. So I'm going to continue going down. That was 1 complete figure 8. Make sure it's tight. Make my second complete figure 8. Make sure it's good and tight. And I will do this 5 times. So that makes 3 there, 4, and 5. You can count how many you have by the amount of rings on the side. Note if you have your clove hitch on one side, that may mess up your counting, so count from the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are 5 complete figure 8s, and lashings we call those wraps. Now we're going to do what I call 3 fraps. That is going in between the pulls now and pulling tight to make sure our rope stays gripped. So right now, if we look at where our rope is, I just finished my figure 8 on the top, and my rope wants to go in between the rods this way, and it wants to go down. So I'm going to pull down with my rope, and I will go in between the 2 pulls on the bottom now. And then again from the other side, my rope will go up, and that was 1 complete loop around. So we will do 3 of those. And every time, pull it tight, and you'll see all your rope pinched together in the middle. That's good. That is really gripping that friction in between the rope and the pulls, and that will keep your lashing together. So that was 1. This makes 2. Pull it tight. And then I will do my 3rd and final one. And pull it tight. Now, you'll notice I finished my lashing, but I still have a lot of excess rope. That's perfectly okay in this practice. It is better to have too much rope than too little. What I do is I notice, okay, right now I have my rope flowing towards me on the bottom. So I'm going to follow my flow of the rope, but rather than go around for another frap, I will just loop it around one of the 2 pulls. I still have excess rope. That's no problem. I will loop around again. And I will keep looping around until I have a little more rope than I need for my clove hitch. Remember, if you have a little bit of extra rope at the end, that's okay. Tying a clove hitch can be very hard if you have too little rope. If you end up going too far, you can always undo one of your loops around. That's a pretty good fair amount of rope. I should be able to do 1 more loop and see if I can start my clove hitch. That's a bit small, so I'll make sure I'll start my clove hitch with this one. So again, make sure you have that clove hitch practiced. Form an X with it and go through the center. One key note is try not to loosen your lashing too much. So try not to get your rope too loose. That's okay. If you had that extra rope, these extra loops here, they help keep that friction tight for us. So when we tighten it at the end, we can just pull all that tension back. Now it's a good shear lashing, and you should be able to bend them right where the lashing is in the middle, and the rope shouldn't easily slide up or down. But if you need to, with dowel rods, you could slide them up and down if you don't like them. That is the shear lashing for the first part. The next step, step 3, we are going to make the cross beam for our A of the A-frame. For this, we are going to need 1 2-foot pole and 2 of our 4-foot ropes. I will begin by sizing out where I want my A to be. So if I want a wide structure A-frame, I'll make it nice and wide. If I want a tall, thin one, I'll make it tall and thin. I tend to strive for about 3-foot base and about 4-foot height. Yep, that looks about right for me. Maybe a little bit inwards. And that looks good. Now the next thing we're going to do is figure out how high we want our ridge line to be. Our ridge line is going to be the pole that sits across the top of the A-frame. So how tall do we want the actual inside structure of our A-frame to be? And that's what this crossbeam will decide. So if you want a low internal structure for your A-frame, put your crossbeam low. Usually I like mine high. One note of keeping your crossbeams too high is that your 2 4-foot pulls are at different depths from each other. So the higher you go, the more your crossbeam is going to have an angle. The lower you go, the more that's going to straighten out. Keep that in mind as you lash. So I will keep mine, I will put it about 10 inches or so below the shear lashing, and this will help keep my crossbeam pretty smooth and flat for demonstration purposes. So I will keep that marked as I set it down to lash. And I'll remember where that is as I start. If I don't want to forget where I put it, I will put my rope right where my pole is. So now I can start with my clove hitch on my pole and not worry about losing my placement. So now I grab my other rope here, and I will start with my clove hitch on the 2-foot pole here, which will end up being our cross beam. So again, I hope you practice that clove hitch good and well. Now the beautiful thing about smooth dowel rods is if I want my cross beam here, I can still slide my clove hitch along to the point I want it. I'm gonna try and keep this nice and flat as I tie, and I can remove this extra pull as I no longer need it. This next lash that we are going to do is called a square lashing. It will be used for every other lashing except one more shear lashing through the structure. I like to call it following the flow of the rope as I tie. So right now my rope is on the right side of my top pole, and my rope is going towards me on the right side. But I want to get underneath this pole because I need to wrap around it. So I will take my rope here from my top pole and go underneath my bottom pole. Now I'll keep it on the same side of the top pole, so towards me, and pull my rope through. Now my rope, after wrapping around the bottom pole, wants to go up. And so the next pole in line is this top one. So I will go over it. Oops, I lost a little bit of my placement there. That's fine, I can fix that. And now with my rope wrapping over the top pole, it wants to go down. So I will take it down below this top pole. And if you look at the rope we just made, it's a square because we went down here, left here, up here, and right here. That is where the square and the square lashing gets its name. And that was one complete wrap. So I will continue to do that for 3 full wraps. So I will continue my square. I just went down. Now I will go to my left. Then I will go up. And now I will go over to my right. And that was 2 complete wraps. Make sure I keep that nice and tight in between. Okay. Now again, I am going to continue following the flow for 1 more wrap. I am over my top pole. I want to go now under my bottom pole. Continuing with the flow, I just went under my bottom pole. Now I want to go over my top pole here. Keep that tight. I just went over the top, and I will continue going under the bottom. Now, as I do this, you may notice that all of my rope lines up nicely next to one another. What this does is it increases the friction in between the rope and the pole. If my rope were to go on top of my other rope, I no longer have friction in between rope and pole. Instead, my rope is only grabbing my rope, which is not as efficient. We want to have as much contact between the rope and the pole as possible. So I will continue, and that was 3 complete wraps. Now I will go against the flow for one loop. So instead of going underneath the bottom one now, I want to go underneath the top one. After my third complete wrap, I will now go underneath the top pole, opposite of what I did before. And again, I don't want to go under the bottom one anymore, I want to go over. So from this point on, I will be following the flow of the rope once more. So I will go over the top, and now I will go over the bottom one here, and under the top one. And again, following the flow, I will go here. And now again, if you look from the top angle of what we did another square. We went up here, left here, down here, and right here. That is the second square in the square lashing. So the wraps form a square and the fraps form a square. And I will do 3 complete fraps. And try to pull it nice and tight during the fraps, because that again pinches that rope tighter against your pole. That's 2. And I will finish with 3 complete fraps. Pull it tight. Try not to let my par get too far down, and holding it with my other hand. Oops, slid there a little bit. Smooth pulls allow a little bit of sliding. That actually becomes extremely important later in the structure. That is why we specifically do a square lashing. Actually, it allows for sliding and rotating of the pulls during a crucial setup point later. Now again, I've finished my lashing and I have a lot of extra rope. So I will continue where I left off and notice, well, my rope wants to go around this pole. So I'm going over it now, and I will follow the flow of my rope just to wrap around a few times until I get rid of all that extra rope. Now, one thing I would like to point out, I should have pointed out earlier, my apologies, is that it is okay to tie your clove hitch and finish off on any 4 parts or at either of the 2 poles for the lashing. It does not matter which, just choose one where your rope ends. The last thing you want to do is finish your rope by just crossing over your lashing and tying it on a different pole. It doesn't matter which pole, as long as that's the pole you ended on. And that's a little bit more than I need for my clove hitch, so I will start my clove hitch now then. For my nice and crucial X, go one more time, and I will go under my X once again. At this point in time, I really hope you have practiced your clove hitch good and well, because we have many more times to use it. Now we will repeat the process on the other side, and for that, I'm just going to flip it over here. Now, one thing you'll notice is the square lashing has left this these two poles here nice and perpendicular. It looks nice, but we don't want that. So during this lashing, you'll have to rotate it a little bit to get that angle you want. If you need, you can set up, figure out where it's flat, mark it. Otherwise, you may end up with a crooked little A there. That's fine, as long as you have it good and tight. But I want mine to look nice. So again, I'll stand mine up, make sure I have the good width, find I have it nice and flat, and I will mark that and set it down. Now I will tie my clove hitch here on. I will tie it this way. Oops, I let that go a little bit. That's fine. I can always resize it later. Accidents happen. There we go. So now I accidentally let it slide a little bit, so I will stand up once more, make sure it's flat, and now I have the advantage of sliding my clove hitch to where I want it. If I drop it, I can just put it up above my clove hitch now and know that it's flat. So I can set that down once more and continue with my lashing. This is the same lashing we did last time, the square lashing. So right now, we'll look at my rope. My rope wants to go right. Okay, we'll take it right. And now we just want to complete the square. I want to go under my bottom one, and I will go up. Okay. Now that I did the right side of the square, I will do the top of the square. And to do that, I will go over the top one. Oops, let my clove hitch slide a little bit there. And I will finish with the left side going underneath the top one. The second lashing tends to be a little more difficult if you are by yourself, because you'll notice that my bottom pole is sitting on the ground. If you want and you have something to lean it up against, a rock or a box, you can set up your part of your A-frame on top of it and lash that if it helps. But for instruction purposes, I want to keep it flat on the ground to show you what it looks like. Or if you have a friend, you can help them. They can help you hold it up as well. Here we go. So this is my second wrap, keeping it good and tight. And following that square, that's 2 complete wraps, and I will now do my third. And at this point in time, if you make a mistake on where the crossbeam is, it's okay. These are square lashings, and they are fairly forgivable on how you tie them, as they will slide back and forth until we finish this A-frame. So that was my third and complete wrap there. Now I will continue with my fraps. Now at this point in time, I will break the flow of the rope, and I will go around the opposite way. So now I go under the top one and over the bottom one. But I will still keep drawing a square, just in the opposite direction. So again, I have my square there where I went under the bottom, under the top, over the bottom, under the top, over the bottom. There we go. Too many ups and downs in my words there. So that's my second frap there. Pull it good and tight. And again, for my third and final frap. There we go. Now at this point in time, if you want to adjust anything, I recommend doing it before you do that final frap. So look, that's pretty flat. That's good enough width for me. So I will finish off and tie it there then. Now note one thing here. I want to do a little bit of extra loops around one of these pulls. So I have an option. I can either go around this pull or this pull. I will choose to go around this top pull here. But if you notice, if I go over here, I just crossed my lashing, and that's not a good thing. So instead, I will start by going under this top pull, and now I'm no longer crossing my lashing, and I am safe to loop around. I will loop around a few times until I have a little more than I need for my clove hitch. There we go. That's a good 6 inches for me. And I will now start my clove hitch with my X, and I will go through the center of that X. Again, this is why you practice your knots before we start the lashings, because now is not a good time to learn them. And I will pull that clove hitch tight, and that is our first A. We will do the same thing with the other rods we have, but we have a very specific setup for that, so allow me to show you. So now that we have finished our first A here, we are now going to start with our second A, but to do this, we want to make sure that they have the same angle between the 2 forefoots and the same height of the 2-foot crossbeam. So to do this, we're going to take one of our 4-foot pulls and line it up right next to the other one. Take one of our 4-foot ropes and start our clove hitch. Now this is going to be the same X. and then through. There we go. Now before we tighten that, make sure we line up these pulls and put that clove hitch, starting clove hitch, in the same spot, and then we can tighten that. You can tell which clove hitch was the starting one because the second one we did a lot of extra loops, and the first one is right next to the lashing. So now we will do our shear lashing here with these next two pulls, and for this I will speed this up through a time lapse so you do not have to see the same lashing twice. So that was the sped up version of the shear lashing. Same thing we did for the first one, and we can check our angles here, line them up on the bottom, and we can see, yep, that's the same angle between the two. We got that one covered good. So now we will continue on with the crossbar. So for the crossbar, we are going to take our 2-foot pole here, should be our second and last one, and we will have our 2 4-foot ropes, same as before for the A. Now there's a few methods to do this. The most important thing we make sure we do is that we have the same angle in between our A-frame here. So to do that, I will just line it up right next to the other one, right there. Make sure I have the bottoms lined up on both of them. That's pretty good. And then I will start with my clove hitch on my 4-foot pole here, so I know where the height is. So I will do my clove hitch here, and I will line that up, make sure everything is straight, and push that to the same spot as the bottom of this pole. Now I will do the same thing on this side before I continue. I will start my clove hitch here. And this will be a great marking point for where our crossbeam goes. So now I will line this up once more and slide that clove hitch to where I want it. Okay. So now that I have these 2 clove hitches marking my spot, I will now start with the 2-foot section on top, but I will speed through, and one thing you will notice as I do this, after I tie the first one, I will set my A-frame back down and compare to make sure I have the same angle on this crossbar. Again, during the speed up, I will not discuss it, but I will make sure that my second A here is on top and has the same angle as the first one. I will now cut into a time lapse so you don't have to see the same lashing you saw over again. Now that all of that is done, we now have our second A here, and we can check my handiwork. Line up the two bases, and you can see that's pretty good. These two bars are at the same point on both of the A's. They have the same angle. That's a good A. Next part will be the ridgeline, which will go in between here, and that's a pretty complex part. So we'll make sure we cover that good and well. We're gonna start here with both of our cross beams on the same side of the A-frame structure now. So on the right side of the camera, we have this cross beam here, and we are going to lay them down and get our 6-foot ridge line. Now we're gonna do a little bit of setup for this. We need to figure out for individual A-frame structure, we need a wall or a tree or something standing up to lean our A-frames against. I will use this wall here. So when I lean up my A-frames, I want them to lean up against the wall. So I'll lean it up and it will lie down this way. Okay, so I'll stand this up and lie down this way. Now what we want is this ridge line to go in here, so when it stands up, it's perfectly perpendicular to the A-frame structure. So that's pretty easy for this second A-frame here. You put it in the middle, but if you come over here and look at this, if we were to lash it on like this, we'll notice you can't really stand it up in the middle there. So if you want to tie this, it will go underneath the X here of the shear lashing, but above this cross beam. So when you set it down, it won't quite lie down entirely. That's great. It actually lifts up the A part of the A-frame for you, allowing for an easier square lashing. So I will set this up for a square lashing. Here we go. And I'll actually talk you through this square lashing a little bit as I grab 2 more ropes, one for this side and one for this side. So for the square lashing here, one thing you have to realize is it is okay to have more space on the outside than less space. A structural A-frame will have a little bit of a lean on both the A's. If they are both out and the top's a little bit longer, you'll have your A-frames trying to pull down. So what I'm trying to say is you want your A-frame to have a little bit of an angle inward and not an angle outward. So to do that, you will have a little more extra wood on the outside of your square lashing here. So we'll try and line it up in the middle. I'll give myself a good 6 inches there, plenty of extra space. And I will start with my clove hitch, which again, I hope you all have practiced. There we go. And it's the same square lashing we did on the crossbars of the A-frame, although this time it's actually going to be a perpendicular square, and we're not gonna bend it. So now we'll continue on with the same square lashing we did before. Over the top, under the bottom, we will do 3 complete wraps, and then we'll do 3 complete fraps. We'll tie off the excess, and then we'll finish with a clove hitch, which again, I hope you all have practiced because it can become a little difficult to tie a clove hitch at the end of a lashing sometimes if you haven't practiced. So there we are. That forms our 3rd incomplete wrap. So we'll continue with our 3 fraps, good and tight, actually forming a square this time. There we go. Pull that tight. And we'll continue with wrapping the excess around the end here. There we go. That's good enough for my clove hitch. Tie that off there, and under this one. There we go. That is our clove hitch. Now, one thing you'll notice, the reason why we do our square lashings is you may have realized that the square lashings rotate around the poles and the rods. Well, when we stand that up, that allows those lashings to rotate around the poles as we lift it up. This allows us to stand up our A-frame without worrying about breaking any lashings we have done. So that's why we use square lashings on the crossbar of the A-frame, even though they're not entirely perpendicular. So that was just an example. You don't have to actually lift it up, but we will now do the same thing over here. And this one I will likely speed up. That was the top of the ridge line. Now for standing this up, since it is a smaller A-frame, we are able to grab both sides and with all that squeaking, bring it up against a wall. Now we have the basis of our A-frame here. We have the top ridge line and our two A's. Everything we do from here on out will be for more structural support and integrity of the A-frame. So now we are going to do our sidebars here for structural integrity. I will start with one of the 6-foot poles we have left and 2 pieces of rope. We're going to take this over here to this side. And at this point in time, you can figure out how big of a sidebar do you want. I recommend the lower down the better because it allows a bigger rectangle here for structural integrity, whereas if you go up higher, it allows a lot more wobble into your structure. So to start, we're going to make sure that our A-frame has a good angle to it. Right now, not really, it's too straight up and down. So I'm gonna walk out these legs some more, and it's got a good lean to it. We'll lean it up. Still pretty straight up and down. That's all right. But we've got a lot of space to work with here. So I'm gonna set it down and walk out the legs even more. There we go. So now it's got a nice good angle. When we lean it, that's pretty straight up and down. That's got a good angle. That's going to be a pretty good structural A-frame. So now that I got the nice, both these are a little straight up and down with a slight angle inward. I will set it back down and continue with more square lashings. So at this point in time, again, I really hope you practice your clove hitches because that's how we're going to start again another lashing here with our lovely cross and through the bottom and tighten. Now we'll figure out about the central point. That's pretty good. Slide my clove hitch over. And one beauty about the square lashing is it doesn't have to be perfectly perpendicular. As you lash, it'll fall down, but when you tie the other end, it'll pull straight up. And with this sidebar here being really long, small angle there won't matter. So we can just figure out where we want it here, hold it up, and start with our square lashing. And that's going to be the same square lashing as before. We're going to follow the flow of the rope, and I'm going to go underneath or behind this back one here, and then in front of this forward one here, behind this front one on the top, and I will continue following my flow of rope for 3 complete wraps. So that's 2 wraps. And I have 1 more and final wrap, making sure I keep it tight in between, because the strength of my lashing depends on the strength and tension of my rope here. So that there makes 3 complete wraps. So I will go against the flow once, and then follow the flow to do 3 fraps. 1 frap, nice and tight. 2 fraps, nice and tight. And that makes 3 fraps, nice and tight. And I'm gonna go over here so I can tie my clove hitch on this side. That's a decent amount for a clove hitch. And again, I really hope you practice those clove hitches because they're extremely important. That's good and tight. You can see it still rotates. That's the beauty of the square lashing. Now we're going to do the same exact thing on the other side, and just to make it look nice, we'll put the last 6-foot pole about the same height on the other side. I will get it started, and I will likely time lapse the rest with our last 2 4-foot ropes. We know we're getting close to the end, and all we have left is a blanket and 2 ropes. And I will time lapse this for you. So that is the last lashing we have to do here. We will continue with the last part of tying cross sections and the rope. The last part, like I mentioned, will involve just the cross ties and our blanket here. So I will get 1 of our 15-foot ropes here, and I will start up here in one corner where the ridge line meets our cross beam here. I will not want to loop in for this so they can see well. I want to go across these 2, so I am wrapping at an angle in between the ridge line and the crossbar, and I will tie 2 half hitches around both of these 2 bars at the cross angle here. So the 2 half hitches, as we mentioned before, I am going to have my tying end go over my rope, and then I'll go through the loop from the bottom and pull tight. And as I'm going above, I will have my new rope go above and pull my loop, my tying end through the loop on the bottom and tighten. And the 2 half hitches will cinch tight. And now follow me down here as we will take our rope and wrap it in between our A-frame structure and our side beam here. And again, we're going to cross around these two and pull back up. Now in this point in time, we are going to use our overhand on a bite about in the middle here. So we'll take our little loop or bite here and knot terminology. We're going to form our loop and go through it, as you hopefully practiced by now. And now this is our loop in the middle of our rope. And what this does is create a pulley for us. So if you look at your A-frame, you have the ability to pull it over and tighten it. But what this will do, if you're not up against a wall, is pull it all the way down. So you only want to pull it until your A-frame is about the angle you want. And then we will finish with 2 half hitches here. And you will have a lot of extra rope. So after pulling through the overhand on the bite, allow me to show you that one more time. So we have an overhand on the bite on our first rope. The rest of the rope loops around the bottom down here. And then as we pull through, we're going to take our long side of the rope still, go through our loop, and pull back down, only to the point where our A-frame is about the angle we want, and then we'll finish with 2 half hitches here. So we'll form our loop and go through and pull, form our loop, go through and pull. Now we'll take our second 15-foot rope and do the same exact thing on the other cross section. Again, we'll go here in between our cross beam and our ridge line. We will tie our 2 half hitches, as I hope you have practiced by now. Form a loop and go through, form a loop and go through, pull tight, and we'll just go right on top of this one, cross tie here. We'll wrap in between the section of the A-frame and our side beam, wrap around both of them, and now on our first rope going down, we will tie our overhand on a bite, form the loop, and go through. So now we have a loop in the middle of our rope. We'll take that excess rope on the end here. We will go through that loop we made, and we will pull it back down towards the bottom, creating a pulley. And now with this, you can pull on it, and it will straighten up your A-frame, and you will tie your 2 half hitches. The last knot you have to tie for this right here. Form a loop and go through, and form a loop and go through. That's the last knot we have to tie. Now what that does is it creates structural integrities on both angles. So if you try and pull it this way, this rope tightens. If you try to pull it this way, this rope tightens. This creates a nice strong A-frame that can now withstand a lot more wind. And the final step, depending on how you plan to use it, I will use a blanket, my 5-foot by 5-foot blanket here, and just lay it over top of my 2 sides. And what this does is finish our A-frame for our structure. So I now have a comfortable place to sleep tonight. Now that I tied my A-frame structure, I have protection from the wind, I have protection from the sun. If it sprinkles a little bit, I have protection from the rain. Thank you all for learning this instruction video with me, and good night. If you have any questions on how to tie any questions on how to tie an A-frame, or you want to learn a little bit more about the lashings, feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section down below, and I will gladly reply with all my knowledge. If you do have any more questions on any other potential uses for lashings, feel free to ask as well. I spent 7 summers working at a scout camp. I have tied over a dozen A-frames and several other lashed structures. So again, feel free to ask out with any questions you have, and I will gladly answer them. Thank you for viewing this video.